Have you played Atari today? Well, I have, but I've got a lot of different options for how to play Atari today. And the question is, what is the best way to get your Atari fix into 2024? So today I'm going to be going through all of these and talking about some that I don't even have as we try to figure out what is the best way to play Atari. Is it on something like the GameStation Pro? Is it on something like the Tiny Arcade? How about the Retron or the Jaguar? What about the Atari VCS or the new Atari 2600 Plus? There's so many options, so without further ado, let's get into it. There are many ways to get your Atari fix these days. For a company that seems like a nostalgic memory from the past, there actually seem like there are more current ways to play Atari games and the likes of Pong and Centipede than there are current ways to play Super Mario Bros. Or Nintendo. So that brings me to the subject of today's discussion. What is the best way to experience Atari today? We're at the end of 2023, heading into 2024, and I've realised that I have several ways to experience Atari games. But also that it's far from all of them. I'll be pitting the brand spanking new Atari 2600 Plus, which is an update of the classic Atari hardware, against the also brand spanking new Atari GameStation Pro, which is a plug and play loaded with games and the ability to expand the game lineup. Whilst that may be the choice many of you feel is the end of the current discussion, is far from the end of the full picture. The Atari VCS has been around for about 3 years and is a different proposition to the others in that it's more of a modern console and a modern approach to the Atari experience. But that's not all. The Retron 77 has been around for a while and is something of an alternative to what Atari are now doing with the 2600 Plus. If you want the Atari experience without going the hardware route, you could just decide to pick up Atari 50, which is the 50th anniversary collection celebration that came out to rave reviews in 2022 and is continuing to get new games through updates. Atari 50 is available on a variety of platforms. Likewise, I've included the Evercade in the lineup, as whilst the focus of that retro-themed series of systems go far beyond just Atari, it is a route you could follow to get a modern-day Atari fix. The next contender on the list is an original Atari 7800 console, which, whilst not currently available, we'll use to see how all these modern updates compare to the experience of using classic hardware from back in the day. And lastly, and almost for the fun of it, we'll be stacking up the likes of the 2600 Plus, the VCS and the GameStation Pro against the humble, world's smallest Atari from Tiny Arcade. I've also not tested an Atari 50 home arcade machine, which I do know is out there, nor do I have an original Atari 2600, as my trusty old 7800 has been my go-to classic hardware for some years. I do have an Atari ST, a Lynx and a Jaguar, which I could add to this conversation, but as they're not currently available and have their own libraries of games that don't really cross over with the others, I'll leave them out of the main conversation for now. Oh, do you know what? What the hell? I've told you what systems I don't have and which do different stuff, but I'll do my best to include them in the conversation as best I can. So let's make this an all-out Atari brawl. Now, I really can't speak on every variation of the Atari 2600 between the 4 and 6 switches, the juniors and stuff like that, and I won't be able to really talk on the Atari 800, even though I did have one when I was a wee nipper. But I'll do my best to make this the ultimate Atari discussion for where you can get your best Atari fix in 2024. The criteria I'll be looking at will include the availability of each of the options, the games available for each, the options for expansion, the design, the controller, the nostalgia factor, portability, price, and any bonus features. May the battle for the Atari crown commence. Starting things off, let's look at the availability of each of the options. The Atari 2600 Plus. Now, if you're in the United States, you should be able to get this easy peasy. I'm in the UK, and here it's on Amazon as a UK Amazon exclusive at the time of making this video. For clarity, I know there are other places in the world other than the UK and US, but I'm in the UK and the US is fairly prominent. So if you're in one of these other places around the world and they don't stock it, at least you should be able to get it either by ordering it from North America or Europe. Likewise, the GameStation Pro is available readily in the US, and although I once again got mine from the UK Amazon site, the stock does seem like it's slightly more limited here. Although it may not just be an Amazon exclusive, you might be able to get it elsewhere. When it comes to the Atari VCS, the VCS is where things start to suck if you live in the UK and Europe. Even a few years after its launch, it doesn't seem like Atari want this thing to be easily accessible outside the US. Maybe if it had sold more stateside, they'd have jumped on a worldwide launch, but as it is, I had to get mine from good old Uncle eBay. Next up, we have the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection of Games. Now, this technically isn't a console, so why have I included it? Because it's where you can get your Atari fix today. And your best bet if you want to play Atari today, or any day, and also anywhere in the world currently, is to get Atari 50, which is available on the Atari VCS, but also on PC, Switch, Xbox, and PlayStation. As long as you can get one of those consoles or a PC, you will be able to get some Atari goodness in your life today. Next up, let's talk about the Evercade. Like Atari 50, the Evercade games are just software, so you'll need to be somewhere you can also get an Evercade console. Whilst it's not as readily available as Switch or PlayStation, Blaze, who make the Evercade, have done a decent job at getting Evercade and not Evercade consoles, the Super Pockets, onto physical store shelves in both the US and Europe. One problem though, at the time of making this video, their licensing agreement with Atari is about to end, so the 5 or 6 Atari cartridge collections will soon become what they call legacy carts. The Retron 77 has been out a while, and whilst you can still find it okay, it's not something you can find in every store, and it may be something that takes a few searches on Amazon or eBay to locate. The Tiny Arcade has been out a while, but it's still available in some shops and easy enough to find online, but I think its days as being easy to find may start to dwindle. Big arcade releases from Arcade 1UP are available online, but I imagine these will be slightly harder to locate within the next couple of years. That said, I think there will always continually be some variant of an Atari arcade machine that you can get out there. Atari Flashbacks. Now, these are always going to be available in one form or another, and have been year after year. Maybe the GameStation Pro will replace them and there won't be a new Flashback for a while, as they do seem like to be competing devices, but I think there will be Flashbacks easy to get for a long time. Retro hardware, like the Atari 2600, the 5200, the 7800, Atari Jaguar, Atari Lynx, and Atari ST and 800. So look, the classic machines is what's left, and I'll be straight to the point with this. eBay will be your friend if you want to find them. So, the results of this first round in terms of availability. The winner has to be the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection, as it's on Switch, PlayStation, Xbox, Atari VCS, and PC. But if you want some Atari hardware, then it seems like the Atari 2600 Plus or the Flashbacks may be your best bet. The games available for each. Starting again with the Atari 2600 Plus, this is an interesting one, as you have the new releases of Berserk Enhanced, Mr. Run and Jump, and the Paddle Bundle, and after that, this device will need you to seek out second-hand games from the 1970s and 80s. These games are easy to get and cheap enough on eBay and in second-hand gaming stores. If it sells well enough, I expect there will be some more new carts released in at least 2024 and 2025. So they can continue to push the console, but time will tell how many new carts we get. This will all be about seeking out the old ones. And if lots of people are doing them, the prices may start to creep up. The Atari GameStation Pro comes with 200 games built in. This includes 80-odd Atari 2600 games, and then a bunch of Atari arcade games, and a small selection of Atari 5200 and 7800 games. Whilst the 2600 list is fairly comprehensive, there aren't any third-party games, as you sometimes see licensed on other plug-and-play devices. The 5200 and 7800 games lists feel like bonus in nature and not what you'd call a true compilation of these systems in full. But this may not be a problem, but I'll get onto why in a moment. The system also comes with about 70 or so bonus games, and these are games from other consoles and arcade games. These are the Pico-released games, which give a selection of games that company has picked up the rights to and include some good games in there. They may not have been on Atari originally, but they are now, so I guess they could be considered Atari games, the same as you'd think of Alien vs Predator or Pac-Man as being Atari games. Now, if these games aren't enough, the console does allow you to add ROMs very easily, and this means you can quickly use the device to access every Atari 2600, 5200, 7800 and arcade game as easy as pie. You can also add games from other consoles like the Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, Game Gear, TurboGrafx, and I'm sure even a few others. Now, you can use this to expand what can be played massively on the GameStation Pro, but we'll get more into that a little later. Now on to the Atari VCS. If you want the most ways to play the same Atari game on one system, it will definitely come with the VCS. The console comes with the Atari Vault collection already on the console, and that gives you a bunch of Atari games from arcade, as well as 2600, 5200 and 7800 games. You can then access an online app and game store where you can get a second collection in the Atari Vault 2, and this gives you a bunch more. After this, you'll then have the same games available to buy individually in the App Store. So if you take Adventure, for example, you can get it so you can launch it from your dashboard without having to open the Atari Vault app. Why anyone would do this is anyone's guess though. As mentioned previously, you can also get Atari 50 on the VCS, and this gives you many of the same games as the Atari Vault collections, and also gives you the games from other systems like Lynx and Jaguar. After this, there is, at the time of writing, over 130 games and collections available in the VCS store, and this includes most of the recent Atari releases like the Recharged games, Atari Mania, the new Tempest, Food Fight, Culinary Combat and Haunted House games. There's also a bunch of indie games in the store, and that includes some great games like BPM Boy, Donut Dodo and Doodle Taxi. Finally, the VCS can go into PC mode and basically access any PC game, Steam, and whatever emulator you'd like to run on the hardware like you would an actual PC. That said, the VCS is not a gaming powerhouse of a PC, so don't expect to play the latest graphic-intensive games on here. Built into the console, you also have apps for Xbox Cloud Gaming and Antstream Arcade, as well as Luna and other streaming apps. Once upon a time, this even included Stadia, which is gone but not forgotten. So you could play Gears of War and the original Mortal Kombat between play sessions of Centipede and Breakout. Now we come to Atari 50, the most impressive lineup of retro gaming in a collection probably ever produced. Games and info from the whole of Atari's history. Most impressively, this includes a smattering of Atari Jaguar games, which is the first time that console has seen its games re-released. In 2023, the game received an update, which added even more games to the collection, and you have to wonder if this could continue to be updated with more games in the future. The Evercade. There are separate collections that include old console games with 2600 and 7800 games on the Atari Collections 1 and 2, and you have about 20 games on each. Then there are the impressive Atari Lynx collections, which bring back the handheld games, which are perfect for the mostly handheld Evercade line of systems. Then there are the arcade collection, which I personally skipped as by the time of their release, I already had about 15 ways to play Centipede. You may need several carts to get towards what Atari 50 collection can give you, but this is a good option to give you the games on the go if you don't have a Switch or Steam Deck, that is. Retron 77. This is just for old carts, and whilst you may be able to install an update on the console if you tinker with it yourself, it doesn't have the same compatibility as the Atari 2600 Plus. As a note, I found that the new release of Berserk Enhanced wouldn't run on the system, and Mr. Run and Jump ran without sound. Also, unlike the 2600 Plus, the console doesn't play Atari 7800 games at all, which is a little bit of a bummer. Now, coming on to the Atari 7800, the original console. The 7800 will play all of your 2600 and 7800 carts, and whilst they may not be in HD, the old console has better compatibility than the 2600 Plus does. Then there's the Tiny Arcade. Now, just 9 games are available on this, and unless some wizard has found a way to add some more ROMs, the 9 games are what you're gonna get. One advantage this has over some others is that it gives you the Atari 2600 version of Pac-Man, which, whilst I'm aware people don't think is the bee's knees, is still fun and I enjoy it. Next up, we have the Atari 2600, 5200, Lynx, ST, and Jaguar. Yes, I've lumped them all together. Now, they may not be in HD, but they are still the best ways to experience the original games as nature intended from these consoles. Look, there are tons of ways to play the 2600, and whilst the libraries may be smaller on the other home consoles, many of the games for them aren't available elsewhere yet unless you go the emulation route. Original hardware is the only way to play most of the licensed games like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, or Star Wars, or Spider-Man, so, you know, original hardware is the best way to go. The Atari Jaguar has only just seen some of its games re-released on the Atari 50th Anniversary Collection, but if you want Alien vs Predator, Doom, or any of the third-party games made for the system, you will need the original hardware. Atari ST doesn't get much love, and unless Atari are about to announce a deal with Retro Games Limited, who made the A500 and C64 minis, to put out an Atari ST mini, and to be honest, they might, the original hardware is the best place to get the library of games that was on the computer that rivaled the Amiga 500. So, what's the result here? The winner in this category is the Atari VCS by the sheer number of options the console gives you. Just from an Atari perspective, it gives you the 2 Volt collections and Atari 50, as well as all of the modern Atari Recharge games and things like Tempest 4000 and Atari Mania. The games on the system also include indie games and access to the likes of Xbox Cloud Gaming and Antstream Arcade, which give you the most impressive list of games you can play on the device, and that's even before you get into PC mode, where you could take this thing to play Minecraft, to then play Halo, to play Super Mario 64, to Pong, all on one console in one sitting. The GameStation Pro is also impressive, but you can't do everything you can on it with the VCS. When it comes to carts, the 7800 and the Atari 2600 Plus are neck and neck, but a few compatibility issues means that the 2600 Plus falls slightly behind. But obviously, this is the most readily available way to play the classic carts for both the 2600 and 7800 and put them on an HD TV. Next up, let's look for options for expansion. Now, this one will be easier to breeze through as a category, as many of the systems can't be expanded. There are flash cart options, yeah, certainly. You can get like one cart, you put a memory card in, and then you can play ROMs, and you can do that probably on the 2600 all the way up to the Jaguar. But these are aftermarket hacks, and isn't an area I have personally explored. I think there are ways to add ROMs to a Retron 77, and I'm sure some people will do this within time on the 2600 Plus. I believe some of the Atari Flashback consoles also are hackable so that you can add ROMs to it. But I don't actually know this process myself, and I don't have any of the recent Flashbacks to even explore. Now, the GameStation Pro, on the other hand, comes with a micro SD card slot, and adding extra games is as simple as dragging the ROM files from the desktop onto the memory card, and picking the game you want to play from a menu. Most impressively, the GameStation Pro lets you add games from non-Atari systems. This is including things like Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, SNES, arcade games, PC Engine, Game Gear, and Mega Drive. The system has also received at least one official update so far, which improves on the functions as an emulation device. The Atari VCS of course has PC mode, so you can play any emulator you could have on a PC, and many VCS owners use it as their go-to emulation device. So as a result here, I would say that once again the VCS does have the most options there, but I'm kind of tempted to say that the GameStation Pro is right up there, as they have purposely built all of the options for expanding the library into the system. Now, moving on to design. If you want Atari nostalgia, you can't beat having a collection of original hardware. If that's what you want, that will win hands down. In that same sense, if nostalgia is what you're looking for, anything you play Atari 50 on won't scratch that itch, and the same with the Evercade cartridge collections. The tiny arcade actually gives you a micro-sized version of both the Atari 2600 and the fat old-style CRT TV, which looks like it's been ripped straight from in front of the Simpsons couch. So it gets some brownie points there. The Atari 2600 Plus does a great job to recreate the look and feel of the original Atari 2600 console, but it's smaller and it is just a 4-switch version and not based on the 6-switcher version of the console. It's smaller, but it doesn't feel like a mini console, and they've added that the Atari logo lights up, which is a nice touch. The VCS also has a light-up logo, and it is a design which is clearly inspired by the Atari 2600. But there are no switches and no cart slot, which is a shame, as a cart slot to give you the ability to play original games would have made it the best of both the VCS and 2600 Plus in one unit. It has a surprising amount of weight to it and looks good on the shelf next to your modern and retro consoles as a nice in-between. The GameStation Pro doesn't recreate any past Atari console, but still gives me the vibe of a 7800 or 2600 Junior. The big buttons on top actually make the unit look like a large gamepad, but with no D-pad. The Retron 77 comes in a couple of different flavors, and I have an orange one, which definitely doesn't call back to Atari's past, but as it's a non-Atari device, they did their own thing. Still, it's smaller than the 2600 Plus and was the cool new kid on the block device on my shelf when I got it. So the result here, for Atari fans, I don't suppose you can beat the original. And yeah, I don't have every model, but the Atari 2600 Plus aims to recreate the original fairly closely. So I'm going to give it to the Atari 2600 Plus. Controller. Hands down, the Atari Jaguar wins every time. Okay, so literally, yeah, that's obviously a joke, but truthfully, I never had an issue with the Jag controller like most people do. To me, it was sort of like a Mega Drive controller with a phone keypad underneath. Yep. Now, I know for many who watch this, you'll just say that the original Atari joystick is where it is at, and that everything else should be judged in its ability to replicate it. But personally, that has never been a favourite joystick of mine. Even when I got the Atari 2600 Plus, I quickly started getting out other controllers to see what would work as an alternative. But the 2600 Plus one works just fine. It's just not my ideal. You can also get official paddles for the 2600 Plus, but I don't currently have these to test. The Retron 77 joystick offers a second button, and to be honest, I prefer the stick and the shape. The Retron Ranger controller doesn't come with the system, but has been my preferred way to play most things on the 2600 Plus and Retron so far. I'm much more used to playing games with a joypad than a joystick, and that's been the way for the last 25 years. So whilst I enjoy joysticks for the nostalgic feel of it, if I'm having issues on a game or want to play a game seriously, the Retron Ranger is where it is at. Now, the GameStation Pro looks cool. I love that it gets wider at the top, which is how most joysticks are. The 2 extra buttons on top, including the trigger, are great ideas in theory. For my hands though, the trigger was always awkward to press. It's also nice that they light up, but this is just a cosmetic thing and will run down the battery quicker as the controller is wireless. And it's great that they added the dial for paddle controls onto it. That is a very nice addition. The VCS has both a modern style controller, which is like an Xbox controller, and a classic style joystick. I like the stick a lot, and I love the cleverness of the stick also being the paddle so that the stick in the middle rotates. For most games on the VCS, my go-to is the modern controller, and whilst the D-pad is just a mostly flat disc, I do think it's up there as a similar controller experience to what you'd have had on the Xbox 360 or Xbox One. The tiny arcade has the world's smallest joystick, and it functions. That's the end of the sentence. Yeah, so it works, and that's about all I can say on that front. Again, with the Atari 50 and the Evercade games, you have to play those with the controls that you'd have on those modern systems or PC. Generally, this means that joypads are not joysticks, and there are no paddle controls. If that retro feel is important to you, you'll want to look to the non-modern options. So the result here is I am giving this one to the Retron 77. Not only is the joystick my preference over the Atari options, but their Ranger gamepad with built-in paddle controls gives me something I'm personally much more content to use for those serious play sessions and not just a nostalgia fix. Now that may be slightly controversial, but meh, this is just my opinion, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on why I'm wrong in the comments. Now, other controllers. I've already mentioned the Ranger for the Retron 77, but whilst that doesn't come with the system, I see it as an essential purchase, just like getting a modern controller for the VCS, and that doesn't come with every model of the VCS, or getting a Switch Pro controller, which doesn't come with a Nintendo Switch. The good news is the Ranger will work with any of the systems with the classic Atari controller port. The Atari 2600, 2600 Plus, Retron 77, Atari ST and 7800 all have the classic Atari port. It's the same port that was found on the Master System, the Mega Drive and the Amiga. I've not done extensive testing across all of the platforms, but as I found in my review of the 2600 Plus, which you should totally check out on the channel, whilst all of my Amiga and Atari ST joysticks worked on the 2600 Plus, the Mega Drive pads wouldn't work, but the Master System pad would. So, the GameStation Pro does allow you to use things like Xbox and PlayStation controllers if connected with a USB Type-C to USB Type-C connection cable. The results of this were mixed. A future update may improve their compatibility though. You can use Xbox and other controllers on the VCS, and things like a keyboard and mouse also are useful, but my testing of these has also been limited for what games will use what options. And if you'd like to use a different controller for the tiny arcade, well, you can think again. Just be careful not to break the one that is hardwired to the console itself. I'm sure there will be adapters so you can use classic Atari controllers on the VCS or use modern controllers on the old hardware. Out of the box though, the VCS gives you the most options, but there's plenty of classic port options that you can use in the old 9-pin systems. Maybe this one is a tie there, because I haven't tested enough to definitely be able to give a 100% truthful answer. Next category, does it work? Now, It may seem silly, but that's a super important question. We could look at all of the systems and their strengths and weaknesses, but the most important thing is that when you buy a device, it actually does what you want it to. So, let's check them out. If you have retro hardware, they should all work. But with the original 2600 being well over 40 years old, there's less and less of these that will work with each passing year. Even the Jaguar is nearly 30. How time flies. But that said, if you have a working model, then the good news with classic hardware is that pretty much everything will work out of the box. The Atari 2600 Plus has around 90% compatibility with classic carts at the time of writing. This is more than the Retron 77, but fan or official updates will improve things in both systems, if they haven't done already at the time of watching this video. Some people are very unhappy with the incompatibility of some games on the 2600 Plus, with the most notable exception being Pitfall 2. I expect this will be resolved. I was also unimpressed that the new Berserk Enhance didn't work on my Retron 77 out of the box, and I'll have to see if an update will improve this. I did also have the game crash on the 2600 Plus itself, but a reset got things working back on track. The Atari VCS handily loses this category as it has a long history of issues with things not running smoothly. Throughout 2023, many players complained over an error where the system wouldn't recognize your zip code, and this would prevent you buying games from the App Store. As a download-only console, this is unacceptable until completely resolved. Personally, I never had this issue, but have had to contact Atari support a couple of times in the past when I bought games and they didn't display as owned. I've also had the system glitch out on me and it's crashed a few times. Now, in my limited time with the GameStation Pro so far, it has worked very well with all of the built-in games so far. Some added games don't load, but I have no expectations that all of them would work, as that's the nature of adding your own games to a device like this. So, result time. I have to give it to the original hardware on this one. Sometimes in the past you'd get a game that would crash or glitch, and this is when we'd end up blowing into the cart for good measure. But mostly, things had to work when you bought them, as there were no day one updates or downloadable patches. All the modern stuff has issues here or there, and they put stuff out that isn't quite ready yet. Next category is the nostalgia factor. Now, I could just easily say the original hardware wins here as the easy answer. But just to give it a bit more meat to this category, I'll mention that the Atari 50 collection gives you videos and artwork and more history and nostalgia-inducing material for your buck than any of the other options. Also, the Atari VCS has all of the recharged games, and whilst these are new, they are built on nostalgia, and it's strange that you can feel nostalgic from something new because it gives you just enough of the past with modern conveniences without it just being an actual slice of the past, which may not be as rosy as your rose-tinted glasses would have you believe. So, let's look at the price. The Atari 2600 Plus is around £100 brand new on Amazon. Although I've already seen this drop in a sale, and I expect it will drop permanently over time. Same with the GameStation Pro, it's about £100 new, but lots of posts on social media have shown it on sale for about $50 within a couple of months of its release. Atari Flashback consoles likewise range from about £70 to £100 depending which one you get, and these frequently go on sale as well. Then there is the Atari VCS. The VCS ranges from $200 to $300 depending if you want the modern and classic controllers bundled in with it or not. But it does seem to go on sale on the Atari website a few times a year. I think this is a bit more than they should sell it for. If they could get it out there for $150 with at least the modern controller included, always in the box, I think the console would get adopted by a lot more people. When it comes to retro hardware, retro hardware can range from cheap for a 2600 to a lot more expensive for an original Jaguar. Now, you may find a bargain on eBay, but remember, you have very little guarantee it will all work smoothly and work for a long time if you get something from eBay. So buying retro hardware is definitely a roll of the dice. The tiny arcade goes up and down in price. I think I got mine for about £15, maybe even slightly less. But I think I've seen it on sale recently for as much as £50, which to me is insane, because you could pay just a tiny bit more and get a Flashback console. Atari 50 is mostly reduced in price now to around £20, and I've even seen it for about £14 brand new. Evercade games are likely to go up in price as they become legacy carts and don't offer you as many games as the other options. Well, unless you buy all of the carts, but even then, still doesn't compare to what you get on Atari 50. So I've got to give this one to Atari 50. The price and quality and quantity of what you get for your money can't be beaten. But if it is hardware you're after, the GameStation Pro allows you to play the most variety of games with its ability to add more ROMs for a cheaper price. The VCS is most expensive, but likewise you can get the most different games that will play on it, because of the PC mode and emulators and stuff like that. So, who wins? Well, this was never a very equal battle, so it won't have a very simple answer. Comparing most Atari systems from the past 50 years to pick one winner isn't easy, as so many of them are to serve different purposes. For me, I'd say if it's just Atari games you want to play, you should get the Atari 50 collection on the platform of your choice, and if you got it on Switch or Steam Deck, you have the option of having it portably as well. That would scratch the Atari itch in a major way for most people. If you can afford it and don't mind there being the potential of an occasional glitch or a store issue, the Atari VCS by far gives you the most options of games to play. It's the only one that gives you 2 Atari Vault collections in addition to Atari 50, and all of the modern Atari games on one system. With PC mode, you can also basically play any Atari console, arcade or computer game from the past on it as well. And whilst the VCS store lacks the same library of games from other contemporary systems like Xbox or Switch or PlayStation, there are a bunch of indie games, as well as Antstream Arcade, Xbox Cloud Gaming, and the PC mode to give you the ability to play thousands of other games on the system. But I'd wager that for most of you watching this video, you will already have a modern console or a gaming PC, so why bother to get the expense of a VCS to play God of War when you can do that on your other console? I get it, you're only in this for the Atari experience, right? So, if you want some Atari hardware to play Atari games, I'd say to go for the 2600 Plus if you have old carts, or if you don't, then get a GameStation Pro or the Flashback 12 plug-and-play systems. The GameStation has a bunch of non-Atari bonus games, and you can play all kinds of ROMs from other systems quite easily, so unless you want a cart experience, I'd say to go for the GameStation Pro. So look, I know that's still giving you quite a lot of options, so to wrap this up in a few sentences, here are my conclusions. If you want games, then get Atari 50 on your system of choice. If you want to access the most games and get all of Atari's library from beginning to the modern day, get a VCS. And if you want to play old carts, get the 2600 Plus. Or if you want the plug and play, go for the GameStation Pro. But if you're a real one, get the Jaguar. Now, my personal preference is the Atari VCS because it does basically everything I want it to. So that would ultimately be my pick, but depending what you're after, any of the conclusions I've given there hopefully should guide you to what you want. So that's going to wrap things up for this video here. I hope you've enjoyed it. It's been in-depth, and I know I could have dug a little bit more into the Atari ST or tried to dig out an Atari 800 from somewhere. It was my very first computer, but to be honest, I don't even know if I still have that. So until next time, please do me a favor and smash that subscribe button here on youtube.com/@GeekBattleGaming. Check out the written article version of this video over on www.xstreamed.tv/gaming. And until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom. and we're off the air. That brings us to the end of the video. Hope it's been useful and helped you make your decisions on how you can play Atari today. I know I've got a bunch of options and I'm going to enjoy them, but you could do me a favour, please smash that subscribe button here on youtube.com/@GeekBattleGaming. And if you want to read the written review of this article, check out www.xstreamed.tv. And until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom! And we're off the air. This is heavy.